start. So my name is Nina Sarhan, and I've been involved with Period for about a year. I am the coalition director as well as the president and founder of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Period. So I'll do things ranging from planning National Period Day down in D.C. To working on activities down here in the district, and then helping out with different strategic partnerships at the national level.
My name is Anusha. I'm one of the policy coordinators here at Period, along with Amir. I also lead the Period at Ohio State University chapter on the local level. Part of my job role includes leading campaigns, like ranging from I Sign for Periods, National Period Day, helping with all sorts of things like that. Free the Period is the current campaign we're leading. And also we're currently leading a policy boot camp with hundreds of people across the country, and super exciting.
Samir. So I'm actually National Policy Coordinator as well, and like Anusha said, along with Anusha, everything Anusha said is obviously something I work on as well, and Anusha and I also work on passing policy just across the country, regardless of what state it is. We've worked with people in Utah and Ohio and Colorado, wherever it may be, to pass policy for menstrual equity just across the country. And we're hoping to start campaigns to pass policy on the federal and national level as well.
I'm Ada. I'm the national chapter manager here at Period. I've been involved for 2 years now, which is really fun. I'm basically your go-to person regarding all chapter logistics, communications, educational programs, and I'm here to better the chapter's experience and here to make their time at Period and all the pushes that they're doing, if that's policy, education, or service, I'm here to make that a little bit easier. So yeah.
So I've always thought of leadership from a young age because of sports, as well as like our community service activities, as leading by example. So you don't necessarily have to like have a formal leadership role, but you're just doing the right thing, even when it's not convenient. But I think since getting involved with Period, that has definitely expanded. Watching Nadia share her story, I think it's just furthering that you're leading by example, but you're also leading with vulnerability. And I think maybe that's something that I've definitely learned from being part of this movement, is that, you know, when you're being open about something like sexual assault or rape or things that are really hard to talk about, that's also like when you're being vulnerable, you're also exposing opportunities for connection, which is ultimately like the point of why, you know, we're doing what we do, is to connect with others and to help others. And so I think I've really learned that through watching others share their stories, especially watching Nadia speak.
We are like Period, but also young activists across the world really are changing the way that like leadership and also with that professionalism are being viewed, meaning that, like you said, like vulnerability is such like an intrinsic part of a lot of like modern activism, as well as just how we connect with people. And I think that through Period, I have learned that vulnerability is a strength, and that your vulnerability makes you not just stronger and it helps you to learn more about yourself, but also, like you said, it helps you connect with other people who might be struggling with similar things as you. And I think that we are building a new concept, a new definition of what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a professional being in this space. And we're breaking a lot of concepts and these constructs. So yeah,
and to that point, I think like a big thing for me, at least, is like when I look at leadership, the first thing that comes to mind for me is ownership and standing up for something, right? Like having really strong values and obviously leading by example, and really having no place of an ego, right? So it's really working for the betterment of something, of the community, of whatever it may be. But that being said, I feel like with leadership, it's also super important to understand that it's not enough for you to just lead people or lead a community on a goal that you have, but it's also super important to inspire them to make change, I guess, and better the community or work for a goal that they have as well, right? So inspiring people as well to do what they believe is best is also extremely important when it comes to leadership.
I love everything that was said. Oh my gosh, you guys, so inspired by everyone here. But I think to that I would also add, like, to me, leadership is also about not just yourself, but also lifting up others alongside you. So for Amir and I feel like that looks like, so we took down the tampon tax in Ohio, but how can we empower other students to also be leaders across the country, like give them the tools that they need. Policy bootcamp is how we're going about that, for example, and giving them the resources and guidance and letting them champion these issues in their states and build them into leaders and period warriors. Like, let them like have them really champion and voice out about these issues, and really kind of be kind of like the behind the scenes people helping them become the leaders and reach their potential. And I learned that leadership is not always about being on the front lines, but also helping, students and younger people, especially that we work with, recognize their true potential and then really reach for that. And along the way, they're inspiring us too. So, yeah.
This might sound very cheesy, but I think that also, we as kids, as young people, since we're young up until like our 30s, when we're considered real adults, everyone always asks you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And what are you going to do? Where do you want to reach? And a lot of the times, most of the times for a lot of our chapter members and our network, it's who we want to be right now. And I think that a lot of young people do not think that they can be leaders because they're young, they're too young, which is something that also we are breaking those concepts of how, like, what does a leader look like? Because also a lot of institutional racism, sexism, all of these institutionalized isms paint a picture of who leaders are, which are usually white cis old men who don't represent all people. So I think that also we're changing that, and we're inspiring, like you said, Anusha, inspiring young people to really believe in themselves and believe that their voice is powerful and is strong and is loud.
Outspoken, passionate, and organized. I think those are 3 keys to having a big impact. And what we've seen with period activists within our movement, those things are very prominent.
I mean, passionate, empathetic, and driven. Kind of following what you said, Amir, I think that those are all things that our network has, but also touching on what you said before, Amir, a lot of you, but building up, like building a space for other people to fight not for what they believe in or that does affect them directly, but what affects other people. And I think empathy in that sense is a big one.
Yeah, exactly. Off of what you're saying, Ada, I think the biggest thing, at least for my chapter, is we're intersectional. So we are always looking for the most marginalized people to help, and not just help, but also give them space to talk and to lead us, right? Because that's actually how we're going to move forward, is if we're following the most marginalized. And so our work, especially in Washington, D.C., we try to work really closely with the wards in Washington that are actually impacted by gentrification. We're actually working down on the US-Mexico border with the immigrant communities. We're actually on the ground doing the works with people who are most impacted by the policies and the historical policies and the systematic racism, institutionalized racism that impacts the most marginalized. And so I think the biggest thing for me and my chapter is like intersectional. Like we are intersectional, and that means we're always uplifting the most marginalized, whether it's in our daily work or on National Period Day.
To that, I would add, for me, a period warrior is resilient, brave, and fearless. Going back to National Period Day last year, we had this massive group chat with like over 200 period warriors as part of it. I remember that day, we got so much visibility, right? We were second trending on Twitter, and it was just huge for us in the movement. But with that came, with the positive press, came some of the bad press that like many of our period warriors have never ever experienced before. And some of them were as young as like, what, 13 years old, Amir, which is insane. And to see how well they handled that, and they use that as motivation rather than being, torn down by, others' opinions or pushback that they were facing, bad press, all of that. They use that as motivation to really rally up and show how much support there is for this issue, for these issues, and how much more work we really need to do. I mean, that really just went to show, like, oh, there was a girl who talked about how she was bullied in school for organizing a rally. She's like, a bunch of boys went up to me and they made fun of me for, organizing a National Period Day rally. But at the end of the day, we have a community of people that stand by each other, that support each other. And that it was just so wonderful to see in that group chat that people use that as a way to, support each other. And it felt nice knowing that we're all in this together, and we're all experiencing this together. And yeah, really using that to fight all of the pushback, all of the people who think this is not necessary, because it is.
I know that for me, when I started, the most common reaction I got when I told people that I was doing this was just like laughing or giggling, right? And a lot of just talking behind my back, because no one was really talking about periods in 2014 even. Or I know I always talk about how when I first started Period, one of the most common reactions I got from adults was, oh my gosh, you're so cute, right? Like, it is so cute that I'm trying to do something about this.
I think that for me, it's mostly, I mean, like you said, Nadia, a lot of confusion. I think times where when someone asks me, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, I work at Period, and this is what Period is, and this is what I do. A lot of the time I get the, what? Which comes with either why is that an issue? I even got someone once tell me, oh yeah, next thing we're gonna have is a movement to promote diarrhea or something like that. I laugh, just not to cry. But yeah, it's like one of those situations that you're like, people mostly just ignorance around this issue, and laughter and discomfort. But I mean, the silver lining, I think most of the times in which people have not understood what I do, and then I explain a little bit about what we do, thankfully most of the time they're like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and it gets at least that conversation started. It softens it a little bit, but most of the time I think for me it's mostly been people who are confused and who do not believe that it's necessary. Also, just being called a feminist as if it's derogatory has happened to me quite a lot too. I'm like, oh, okay, so you're a feminist.
Yeah, I would say it's more like confusion than outright sexism, at least when it comes to period stuff. On a daily basis, it's different. We could talk about that. But for periods, I think, at least during like my full-time job, that people know that I do period work as well. The men are very uncomfortable, even like talking about it if I'm talking about it. And so I just try to talk about it extra. That's just how I handle it. And so they've gotten over it, I think, over time. And I think that's part of what being a period warrior is. You just like kind of don't give a, can I swear? Probably not. Don't give a darn about what people say, about like what the added necessary like uncomfort or discomfort is. Because if you just go forward with, hey, like I'm involved with talking about period poverty, and it's linked directly to gender equality, and this is why, and 1 in 5, did you know? And you just kind of just talk about it for months. And then suddenly people show up at your work with pads and tampons and awkwardly hand them to you because they know that you're going on a trip to El Paso to hand out pads and tampons. And so that's really over time how I've found the best ways to just like, right, Anusha said, like be fearless and just push forward.
A lot of a really common piece of pushback that we've received is why are you fighting for, why are you fighting period poverty? Why not fight for a real issue, like a quote unquote real issue? And it's interesting because the people who say these types of comments don't necessarily realize, they don't usually experience periods themselves, so don't realize that this is an issue. But I remember the first article that was ever published about us pushing for, access to free menstrual products in, in all academic buildings at the Ohio State University. Like, there were a lot of comments like, wow, this is, so dumb. Like, why these people are just a bunch of brats that are spoiled and they don't want to focus on real issues that actually matter, like food insecurity. But the thing is, like, who's going to advocate for these issues if it's not us, right? Because of the stigma, I think that's an added barrier. And another reason why people are not educated about the implications of period poverty. And so we realize that there's a lot of need for educating people about the work that we're doing as well. From those comments that people have left behind, people have said things like, if somebody can't access menstrual products and they're trying to afford an education, they shouldn't even be going to school, like at that point, which is insane to think that people have left comments. Those are real comments, by the way, that people even have that sort of opinion. And I think it stems from the fact that they're not aware about this issue in the first place. And as an organization, I think it shows that we have a lot of work to do. And another really common piece of pushback that we've received is like, when we're advocating for access to menstrual products and at Ohio State, this happened. It was in a meeting with the administration, and they were like, oh, but money doesn't grow on trees, we can't really, expand access to menstrual products on campus because it's not like, money just grows like that. But every freshman at our university got a free iPad and toilet paper, no matter, what the size of the incoming classes, is always readily available for every student, no matter what the size is. That's the last thing to ever be cut from the budget. But surprisingly, menstrual products were the first thing. And Amir and I realized that that was a massive disparity. And it's largely because of the stigma around periods and how menstrual products were, they're viewed as, or like this whole process, it's viewed as a luxury and personal items and not really necessities. And that's the whole thing that we're trying to fight.
It's similar and different, I guess, in my case. But like, obviously, I hear. It's interesting, right? Because when I first got into period, and to give you an example, like the first time we went and tried to get signatures for a petition at Ohio State on campus, there's a few guys that I know that were walking by, and I was like, yo, like, just come sign the petition, whatever. So they show up and they're like, cool, and they read it real quick, and they're about to sign. They're like, and I don't know if Anusha was there with me, but they look up and they're kind of like, we're not about that, bro. And I was like, what do you mean you're not about that, bro? And then they look at me and they wink like, I know why you're doing this, though, and they walk away. And I'm just thinking, like, it lost me for a second, right? Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then a few seconds later, it kind of clicks with me, right? It seems like a lot of the pushback I get is, it seems like people think I do this to impress someone, like I'm trying to impress someone or get in someone's pants or something. That's why, I'm fighting for menstrual equity. Like, I hear that way too often, so with me, a lot of people are like, it's just not genuine. Like, this is like, it's clearly not you, right? This is not what you're doing. You're doing this for some other reason, to put it on your at first people are like, I know you're just doing this to go to medical school, to get into medical school. It's going to look great on your application. Like, good for you, right? And I'm like, no, dude, like, it's not what it is. And then it transitioned into, oh, you're just doing this to impress someone. And then it turned into, why are you wasting your time with this movement? Like, there's so many other things that you could be fighting for, right? And then being involved in so many other movements, it's like, shouldn't you be spending your time there, considering those are bigger issues? So the pushback, I think, really does come from the stigma revolving around everything, and that's kind of built this whole issue around the pushback that I think all of us are getting. Aside from, like, the sexism part is a whole different, story of why there's pushback here. But I think the stigma to it also has, some weight into it. What's the YouTube video? Remind me. 'Cause I have no
Remember
idea.
that well, I don't, was it that gun girl that
At the
made
rally?
it?
Oh God,
Yeah,
she
but
was
she was
horrible.
like male feminist. You remember that
Oh
video?
my God, yeah,
That was awesome.
that was at we had a rally outside of there was the presidential, this was early on in the presidential election, and they had come to have, like, I forget the wording now, but there was something going on at the presidential elections, and we were outside of the debate area, and we hosted a rally for menstrual equity, essentially. And there was a bunch of legislators there, and right after everything ends, we finish the rally we had, and there was a press conference. Right after the press conference, this woman just jumps at me, literally sticks a microphone in my face. She's like, "So you're a male feminist? Is that even a thing? Like, why are you doing this?" Right? And just trying to get all these, I'd say, negative answers out of me, right? Trying to get me to screw up in something I'm saying. But it was an interesting take. I mean, I will say, obviously, I hear more pushback from non-menstruators than I do menstruators, but there are a fair share of menstruators that have come up to me and, like, literally wanted to fight me for being a part of this movement, which is, interesting in itself. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, intersectionality in terms of the menstrual movement is so, it's just such an, like, Nina, like you said, and also like Amir and Anusha, like you touched on how some people will ask or will say, well, there's more important things that you should be focusing on. And I think that intersectionality kind of is a very big reason why there is a menstrual movement. Nina, you mentioned before that reaching menstrual equity is on the road to gender equality. And I think that in that sense, also in terms of who the people who, like, who are the people who get involved, like, for example, why would someone tell you, Amir, that you can be a part of it? It's because you don't menstruate. But also, like, we need to involve everyone on this journey towards gender equality, because um there's so many intersections within this movement. There's we like, race needs to be in the conversation, class needs to be in the conversation, um like immigration status, um like gender identity, LGBTQ rights. All of these things play a role in the way that menstruators are affected. So I think in that sense, kind of starting that conversation with people regarding intersectionality is so important, because then it also just, it makes us all stronger. It makes us all also um, just connect, because we're all different people with different struggles. And we need to, again, going back to empathy and going back to compassion, and we need to be there for our fellow menstruators, regardless of who they are or how they identify. So, yeah.
That's a great point, because, you know, to me, I think representation is everything. Really, it is. And when we look not just at this movement, but at any movement, and specifically this one, when we look at it early on, when really from the outside you look at Period, it's like, oh, they're fighting for menstrual equity, right? But us within the movement, people who are within the movement, understand that it's more than just giving someone tampons and pads, right? Providing someone free menstrual products. We know that it's a gender equality issue. We know that it's a human rights issue. right? And having representation is extremely important for that, right? So when you really look into it, one group is not going to be able to solve this issue or allow for this movement to be successful. If you want it to be successful, you need intersectionality, right? You need people from all different walks of life, menstruators, non-menstruators, different races, different religions, because you need the different perspectives to better understand the issues that are happening in the different communities, and working from there to, combat that.
I also thought it was interesting, like when we were like researching about the tampon tax in Ohio, we were reading some of the proponent testimonies by people who have testified to repeal the tax before. And it was interesting because I remember reading the LGBTQ communities is one of the most affected by period poverty, which is, fueled by, the tampon tax and other bad menstrual equity policy out there. But they're almost always excluded from the conversation. And while I think it was a huge step, taking down the tampon tax, when I see conversations about this, it's always referring to primarily women being affected by this. And I think we definitely do need to take it step by step. But I think as a potential area of growth, like seeing news outlets and other people talking about menstruators as a whole being affected by this, and being more inclusive when they talk about menstruation and like who period poverty affects. Because I remember seeing a few comments like about after taking down the tampon tax in Ohio, there was like a whole news thing about it, and the clip talked about how this is a huge win for women in Ohio, and I received a few comments like, oh, like what about trans people, LGBTQ community, not being very inclusive there. But while that was a huge win, I think there are more steps that we can, continue to take, and to be more inclusive, or
When you talk about the actual implementation of intersectionality, like how do you actually do that? What does that mean, and what does that look like? And Nadia can attest to this, but like I love the phrase "make space and then move out of the way," and I apply that to pretty much everything that I do in my work, which is rarely why I like to be on camera or do things in front of the camera or do interviews, because there's always somebody who can better represent, like Amir said, represent the movement and be the face of that movement and inspire other leaders and talk about the most marginalized. As a white woman, like my issues are marginalized compared to white men. That's it. And so my responsibility as a white woman is to look for the opportunities where I can uplift others, whether it's speaking at National Period Day or interviewing in an article. And that's what intersectionality is about, is because that's how you move forward, again, by following the people who have been most marginalized throughout history and today. So I think I've identified as an activist since I was arrested during the Kavanaugh hearings, but I think I've only identified as an organizer since organizing and planning National Period Day. And since then I organized Free Rodney Reed rally. I've organized a trip down to the US-Mexico border. And I think you said it kind of when you asked the question, Nadia, but when you're an organizer, you're on the ground and you're doing actual work and you're reaching out to the communities. And anyone can be an activist, sure. Anyone can post a picture, and yes, that is activism. Yes, that's a form of activism. And it would be ableist of me to say that that's any less form of activism than other forms. However, organizing is another level, and organizing is where I kind of identify leaders, and those leaders don't have to be those faces on social media. Probably the best organizers I know are not very Instagram famous, but they're on the ground doing the work every single day. They know the names of the communities that are hit the hardest. They know all the district council members' names because they're calling them every single day to annoy them. Like, those are the people who are really driving the topics that you're reposting on Instagram.
I think it's very, very simple, right? Simply put, it's taking action for positive change. That to me is activism, right? It's having the courage to stand up for justice and equality and really whatever it is you want to stand up for, regardless of who it might even be for. So even if it's for a group that you're standing up against, if you see that their rights are being attacked, you also stand up for their equality, right? That's activism, right? And to me, there's two sides of it, because in my opinion, activism and organizing go hand in hand. So kind of two sides to it. So there's the first part of understanding and confronting the oppression and the broken system, right? And then there's the second side of it, which is building for and fighting for a new system and building a new system, a more equitable and inclusive system, right? So that being said, activism really is 100% very different for every single person. Art, poetry, out in the street, rallying, right? All these different forms of it. And I think it's up to each of an individual to determine how they are able to be an activist. But to Nina's point, when you organize, that's taking it to another level, because you could talk all day, right? And we can be out here posting on Instagram, signing petitions. And this is why I'm a fan of not only signing petitions, and this is a big thing of what we said for National Period Day. National Period Day is nothing more than a rally and just us going out to take pictures and videos if we don't take the next step in putting out petitions and rallying and going out to speak to our legislators and really trying to push for policy change, right? And that is organizing. That's organizing, right? So I think that's extremely important to keep in mind, that activism in itself can be something, but organizing is really the action of going out to make that change physically.
To bring it in terms of like the work that I do with the chapters regarding like how we basically train is not the word, but how we help these youth activists kind of become organizers and leaders in their communities. I think that one of the things that I always let our chapters know when they apply to become a chapter and start getting in contact with me is we have all of these materials, these toolkits that will kind of help you take that step from, like how you guys said, like from being an activist to an organizer and a leader. And one of the biggest things that I always say is you need to take those steps for yourself. You need to take a look at your community. And like Nina said, like organizers are the ones who know their community the best, and they're the ones who kind of have that strong grip on like, okay, I have this all organized in my head. And I think that that's what I tell our chapters when they get started, is that we have guidelines for you, we have materials, you can talk to me, you can talk to our team, but at the end of the day, it's down to you to start those connections, to start these partnerships. And I think that our chapters, when they hear that from us, a lot of the time, because of the type of people that are driven to start chapters, they get really excited, because this is going back to what I said before, but young people are usually not given those opportunities for leadership. They're not given those opportunities for organizing. So I think that that goes back to that as well, of them feeling like they have the power to go from being an activist to then becoming an organizer in their community. And that's so powerful. And I think that that's something that Period really, really pushes, is creating these spaces for young people to thrive in.
I do think that we're cultivating a community of not just activists, but organizers who are organizing their own rallies, mobilizing hundreds of people to also support this issue. And this is the first time I've ever thought about, the difference between activism and organizing. But I think that is a cool distinction that, like Nina mentioned, like everyone here mentioned, taking it one step further, and not just, expressing it on social media, but also mobilizing lots of people to care about this issue, or other issues. But I like how everyone else put it.
I mean, I talk about a lot about how my why of why I want to do activism is because it kind of saved me in a time when I felt really voiceless, right? Like in experiences of sexual assault or abuse, I think I was conditioned to feel like I didn't have a voice. And activism was my first sort of experience of being like, oh, wow, like my voice can do something. Like my voice matters. Like I can use my voice to inspire or mobilize others around an issue I really care about. And so I mean, Nina, I know you recently posted about this too, but like what are your stories of like why you do this? Like why what keeps you going, and not even like for the movement or for the cause, but like your personal story?
For me, at least, I went through a traumatic sexual assault, and then a few months later I was raped. And I did make an effort during that time to tell some people, but wasn't really heard. And so for a long time, I didn't feel like I had a voice. And I, became addicted to alcohol and used that as something that helped with the pain. And then when Christine Ford came forward, that was the first time that I felt really that I wasn't alone, and that the things that had happened to me weren't my fault. And then you sort of, in that day, in that moment, surrounded by so many other survivors, activism became probably the most healing thing that had come into my life, other than alcohol, since sexual assault. And so I kind of just chased that high, that activism high. And when Nadia says like activism saved my life, I really relate to that, is because activism is also what keeps me sober. I wouldn't be able to stay sober if it weren't for activism. And that may mean sometimes just reposting something on Instagram, or that might mean, going and doing period deliveries down in Washington, D.C., and taking the day off of work and just doing things for others, is because activism is what got me out of a really dark place. And activism is what's going to continue to better me as a human being. And it's also through activism is where I've made those healing connections too. Like I would never have been able to start talking about my story and sharing my story if it weren't through not just meeting Nadia, but through many other activists that I've met through Nadia, like Chanel Miller, and being able to talk to other survivors. And that's been, honestly the most healing thing. And so I can really relate to the phrase activism saved my life, at least on my end.
Thank you for sharing that, Nina. Yeah, I think that for me, my mom always said that I came out of the womb with a fist up in the air. And I think that for me also, it's a lot of work on like privilege checking myself. And I think that I am a white European woman, and I'm queer, but I'm very straight passing. And I think that, like, I love the phrase you use, Nina, of making space and then getting out of the way. And I think that, of course, like looking back at like my personal experiences, but then realizing that I am privileged enough to have these safe spaces for me to speak my truth, to speak about my experiences. And a lot of people do not have that. So I think that realizing that, and realizing that me sharing, for me, it's in many spaces, not all, but in many spaces, it's very safe for me to speak my truth. So maybe opening up will help open up safe spaces for other people, and will continue to kind of make way and push those boundaries. So that's a very big part of why I have always wanted to be an activist. I think that also personally, in terms of period related things, I've always lived with a horrific period, and I had to get surgery for an ovarian cyst. And I lived with a lot of pain, and I still do for a very long time. And I also just was not listened to. And again, like just opening up those conversations with people that might be going through similar things gives them the power to then maybe go to their doctor and get themselves checked out. So yeah, that's my end.
For me personally, I really relate to Nadia's experience of trying to find your voice, because I remember the first meeting that we ever walked into, Amir and I, with a legislator. We were like, how are we supposed to talk to a legislator? Like, and at the back of my mind, a constant question was how would they possibly take us and me seriously as a student? Because we didn't know what was possible at the time. Like, we always talk about the story, but we didn't know what we were getting into, what advocacy meant, and when we were first getting started in this movement. But we thought, why not meet with their legislators and express how we want to be involved with them and how we truly believe that we can help them pass legislation. I know that's, at first, it was one of those things, like, we didn't believe it, but sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, figuring out that that we are an asset to these legislators, like, they do want to work with us and students, because we did help build a lot of awareness about these issues across our university. Like, I think that's the dual purpose of petitions, right? Not just getting signatures, but building that broad awareness about issues like the tampon tax, and finding a voice, like being able to convince people who had no idea what the tampon tax was or were completely against this issue, and being able to convince them to support this issue, like within a 5-minute conversation with them. That it was really cool to see, like, our voice has a power to convince people to support issues like this. And I think I found a lot of power in that too. And yeah, it gave me a lot of confidence as a person as well, knowing that we can convince people through conversations to support these issues, and yeah, and pass legislation eventually. I'll let Amir add to that too.
So so from 2005 to 2015, so for 10 years straight, my parents took me every summer to the refugee camp that they grew up in, right? So my family comes from war-torn refugee camp. My mom moved houses 7 times before, like, the age of 21, because essentially her house was bombed that many times, right? So from probably the age of like 10 to like 9 to about 18ish, 19, every summer my family would take us down to the refugee camp, and we have a house that's right outside the refugee camp that we stay at. But we would go down the refugee camp every single morning, every day. And my dad wanted us to, my dad wanted us to better understand the community and really get more involved and really see the way people are living, right? And the reason for that is, what that taught us is, regardless of how much money we might have right now, regardless of your status or where you live or whatever it is you're doing right now in your life, you need to understand the struggle, right? Because that's what it's all about. It's about the struggle to fight for other people, right? People you may or may not even know, right? It's to inspire them to mobilize and better their community, right? And to do it with no selfish intention of gaining anything other than simply having them better their life or their community, right? And so looking at that was just super important for me, because now, I mean, you tell people in the refugee camp I come from the States, so they're like, oh, you come from America? Like, you guys are probably just, like, you got everything. And it's true. It's 100% true. We have everything here. We have everything we could possibly need, right? And to compare someone simply just having a roof over my head, knowing that within a week's time it's not going to be bombed, that's like priceless, right? Living with that fear is ridiculous. Like, there's so many different things that my parents have never experienced, my family's never experienced, because when they talk to us about all the things that they went through, and it's like, you live day to day, right? Am I going to be alive tomorrow? I have no idea. I can't make plans 6 months from now. Not because I don't know what my plans are going to look like, but because I could be dead tomorrow, right? And so understanding the privilege that I live in of just having a safe space, not even to voice my opinion, but to be alive in and of itself is just extremely, extremely important, right? And so to see that and to compare myself to other people who are struggling on a much higher level than I am, right? And seeing that some people have gotten into activism not because they want to, right? They didn't just wake up one day and be like, you know what, activism is actually pretty damn cool. I think this is a big deal. Let me go support this community. A lot of us have done that. A lot of us are, 100%, I support communities just because of that reason. I just think it's important. But the truth is this, if I step back, I'm not going to feel any repercussions about if someone's fighting for that community or not. That's the honest truth. And that's, you know, the privilege that we have as a lot of people is we don't have to necessarily fight for these communities to live a happy and peaceful life because they're struggling on their own, right? But a lot of those people, whether they like it or not, they have no other option than waking up every damn morning to go out and fight for their rights, right? To be able to make sure that people understand that we too are human, we too are people, and we deserve equal rights. That in and of itself is like that privilege that we have to step away from it is again, that's priceless because so many of these people are just, they have no other option than to be activists, than to fight against the oppression that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So that is why I am involved in this. That's why I go out and I raise my voice for other people and make sure that my privilege isn't going to let me not be in touch with the struggle that's happening around me. I want to see us dissolve as an organization. I hope one day this will no longer be an organization. I hope we wouldn't have to. It's unfortunate that Nadia, you had even had to start this organization, right? So I would hope that one day we would be able to pass the legislation we need to be able to destroy the stigma of menstruation, right? To be able to educate people enough for them to understand the importance of menstrual equity, that this is not a woman's issue or a menstruator's issue, but it's a human rights issue. It's a gender equality issue. And hopefully by doing that, we can shut down as an organization because we have served the community that we needed to serve. So that's long-term goal. that's a long-term goal I have for Period.
Through that process, I'd love for us to see, I'd love for us to continue empowering young people to raise their voices and fight for what they believe in, right? So even after Period, to find their voice, because this is honestly how I found mine, through, I don't know, meeting with legislators and getting the opportunity to, pass legislation in Ohio and all of that. Like, fast forward to now, all of that's really helped me and given me the confidence as a young woman. And I hope other people who are involved in this movement, our period warriors, they're able to find the power of their voices to affect change.
Yeah, I love the long-term thought, Amir, of being able to not exist as an organization because we've solved the issue. That's such an optimist viewpoint, which I love. I'm a little bit more cynical and short-term view, but I always, going back again, I think what we've been talking about this whole conversation about intersectionality and looking at the most marginalized. And right now, with COVID especially, it's so clear that the most marginalized people are the incarcerated most of the time, Black and minority people who have been incarcerated. And it's been a struggle, at least from my end in Washington, to be able to get period products in. And so for that issue alone, I really would hope that in the next year, especially with COVID, and we know how conditions are in prisons anyways to begin with, that we're able to find some ways of increasing our involvement with the correctional system, because I know that the prison system and the correctional system is one of the most messed up systems in the United States. And if there's one thing that, you know, we as an organization should be trying to do is get period products in there, if possible. And, you know, I've at least tried from my end, but they always get turned away as, what do they call it? Like illegal, you just like can't bring them in. So that would be, you know, my short-term goal over the next year is to be able, yes, contraband, thank you, Michaela. They were turned away as contraband. And so my short-term goal over the next year would to be able to make connections or be able to find some avenues to be able, whether through legislation, or just simply annoying the wardens enough to enable more period products to be able in period prisons.
I think that I know that we already do this, but I think that one of the things, more short term, but also long term, is just connecting all of, like, creating just a very strong communications web for our, like, all youth activists across the world. I know that we already do that, but I have like this vision of it being like more large scale in a way that I have no idea how, if that's but I think that we all kind of connect them depending, like, if they're in a specific state, and the policy boot camp does that, and we do have like social media channels. But I think that there are so many amazing activists out there, and like that I would love to connect with other amazing activists. And I think Amir and I were talking about this the other day, when we were working on something else. But there are so many voices out there because we have such a vast network. We are growing so quickly, and we have so many activists. And like, going back to what Nina said in terms of organizers, sometimes some of the best organizers are not that like vocal outwardly. So I think that we might have some amazing chapters and young activists that are working really hard and doing amazing stuff. And I would love to just have a very like strong grip on knowing who all these people are. And we do what we can given our team and our reach. But I think that that's kind of something that I would love to see, is a way of finding all these gems, because they're everywhere.